With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Welcome to the College Football Playoff Show Q&A, where Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah answer questions about the playoff and its contenders from subscribers. Thanks you guys for joining us on the College Football Playoff Show press conference. Doug Lesmerises, of course, with Shehan Jeyarajah. And we have some questions this week. Shehan, we were saying we're a little caught in between, but like we soldier on. We're like a week in as you guys are hearing this. Everybody's just getting pads on or getting ready to get pads on. So now you start finding things out, right? Helmet shells, you're limited. I know there's been some changes with the practice rules this year, and I know a lot of coaches kind of aren't happy. It feels like it's maybe harder to get a handle on your team. But I think a week from now, Shehan, there's going to be stuff starting to pop, right? Kind of like as you get a little more towards the middle of preseason camp. Maybe if there are quarterback competitions, we're going to hear about guys winning jobs. Unfortunately, maybe, injuries start happening, things that you don't expect. But we're out of the off season, but we're not really into the season. So we're kind of at a weird point this week.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I have a perfect example of where we're at. So for people who may know, I'm a Baylor grad. I still follow a lot of my friends who are Baylor fans. And one tweet that was going crazy on Baylor Twitter the last couple of days was this short clip of Dave Aranda just basically bringing the huddle together and just jumping around and slapping guys. And he's a very quiet, reserved guy. And that alone was enough to get like 100 retweets. People are starving out here.
Oh, yeah. I will say I was at Ohio State practice this week, and we were talking. We did a news conference in person on the indoor field. We do go in the team room at Ohio State sometimes for interviews. We were doing it in the indoor field. Ohio State requires masks indoors on campus. So this is like a little more spread out. It's you're outdoors, but you're indoors at the same time. And I was sitting in a folding chair in person talking football in person. And Ryan Day, the head coach, was able to answer football questions based off football, not based off projections, based off practice. And I could feel something in my body, like I was absorbing footballness. It wasn't on Zoom. It wasn't trying to get answers out of like, I don't know, we'll have to see. It was like, oh, you guys just got off the practice field and let's talk football. So we're very close. Like that was a little taste of it. And a week from now, we'll be into that even more. So we do have some questions. The main pod this week, we're going over Notre Dame. Does Notre Dame deserve to be in our college football playoff discussion? We do that every week on the main pod. Who should somebody be in? Do we let them in or not? And then we rank all the teams that are in. And so far, the teams in are Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Texas A&M, Iowa State, and Georgia. Maybe Notre Dame will be in there. We're ranking everybody based on the best head coaches. So Nick Saban just signed a big deal. We're going to talk about that on this podcast a little bit, the Nick Saban career. But then we're going to rank Nick Saban compared to Matt Campbell and Jimbo Fisher and Lincoln Riley. And we'll do that on the main pod. Make sure you catch that. Just get subscribed to the College Football Playoff Show so you don't miss any episode. Shehan, I will start with a question for you. The passing of Bobby Bowden this week, an unbelievable legacy, an absolutely unbelievable legacy as a winner and as somebody. And I would say this: I didn't know Bobby Bowden. I didn't cover Bobby Bowden. I don't think Bobby Bowden, sometimes it takes the passing of someone for that person, or, unfortunately for everyone to realize how beloved that person was. That was not the case with Bobby Bowden. Bobby Bowden knew in his life how beloved he was, but after the fact, it's just a reminder of it, of the very special place this guy held in college football history. So, Shehan, my question for you is this: which current head coaches have the best chances to leave a legacy like Bobby Bowden, both in terms of success and in terms of how beloved he was?
This is such an interesting question because the sport, one, is nationalized in a way that it wasn't to the same extent with Bobby Bowden there. And so people around the country are constantly hearing from the top coaches in a lot of ways, right? And so it means that fan bases grow to hate him. Fan bases are competing directly with these teams in a way that's different, I think, than usual. And so this isn't a perfect answer. I think that this guy has certainly been at times controversial, at times, drummed up different things. But I think the closest answer and the closest analog I can come up to for Bobby Bowden is the guy at the rival program, Dabo Swinney. So first of all, he is a national championship type coach. He has raised the program's level probably forever, which I think is something that Bobby Bowden certainly deserves a lot of credit for, is he turned this program at Florida State into something else. And while, again, you'll get a soundbite or something like that sometimes people get a little upset with, I think that's inevitable in this day and age. I think the thing with Dabo is that he has really spearheaded a style of coaching and a style of staff management that's really built around, hey, Nick Saban's a grinder. Nick Saban, you come into his staff and you are grinding. You are there day and night. You're there, 70, 80 hours a week. Well, Dabo Swinney's very open about, hey man, you got your daughter's ballet recital, go see that. We want you to be home by 6 or 7, even during the season, right? And I think that from that perspective, in a lot of ways, I think culturally, Dabo Swinney's been very good for the sport. And again, there's always going to be people that don't like him. I don't think that there's one of these top coaches that at this point, that everybody's unanimously in love with, except for, maybe a guy like Matt Campbell, who it's because he's very early in his career. But I think that Dabo Swinney's probably as close as you're going to get at this point.
That's a really good answer. I think there is like a folksiness and a charm to Dabo that is reminiscent of Bobby Bowden. I think Dabo will have to stay at Clemson to do that. Like a lot of, everyone likes to sort of theorize when Nick Saban hangs it up. Dabo, who played at Alabama, would he be next there? But the idea of, and there's obviously the NFL lure for every head coach, and every successful college head coach faces that at some time. But the lure of like, could Dabo, Bobby Bowden, I think, was 34 years at Florida State, 44 as a head coach. Dabo could do 35 years at Clemson if he chooses to. And that is going to be his choice. He's established so much. I don't think he could go 2-10 for 10 straight years. And I'm not sure they would like.
He's won 2 titles.
He's done something that no coach has ever done there. So that is a really good answer. I do think someone like Lincoln Riley, who took over at Oklahoma in his early 30s, but it feels like every year he gets asked about if you're going to be the coach of the Cowboys. I don't know if Lincoln Riley wants to stay at Oklahoma for 40 years, but he certainly would have the opportunity to. And it's just hard when you think about sort of the modern day coaches. Obviously this is not news. It's just hard to stick around as those special older guys did. Eddie Robinson, 55 years as a head coach. Joe Paterno, 46 years, all at Penn State. Bobby Bowden, 44. Bear Bryant, 38. Woody Hayes, 30 plus. It's just Frank Beamer, 35 years at Virginia Tech. It's just harder to do that. Harder to choose to do that, right? So we're going to get into Bobby Bowden a little bit more, but I don't think there's a better answer than Dabo. Well done by you.
Well, thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and pull my Bobby Bowden question out. So people may know I'm, a little bit on the younger side. I wasn't necessarily there for all of Bobby Bowden's biggest memories, greatest moments. So for you, watching college football, is there a moment? Is there a play? Is there a game? Is there a player even that kind of exemplifies what the Bobby Bowden era was at Florida State?
So you just want to bring up that you're young and I'm old?
If I
don't know if people know it, but I'm Shehan and I'm young. Doug, you're old. I know what you're doing.
What was the war like, Grandpa?
So let me say this, and also this is something that you will learn about me. Terrible memory. I have a terrible memory. So let me say this. My answer is no. I do not have a specific Bobby Bowden memory, but my answer is this. My memory is he was always there. So 80 from 1987 to 2000, 14-year run, finished in the top 5 of the AP poll every single year.
Crazy.
So that's like my teenage years into my adulthood, right? And it's just, he's there. And he seems nice. Like he's there and he's not a jerk. He's there and he's friendly and funny. And he doesn't seem like all he does is scream at his players. Like he seems like a guy you want to play for. And he's just there. And so I'm not so sure that's not a better compliment than a specific thing, because it's not about specificity with Bobby Bowden. It's about consistency every single year. That 14-year period from 1987 to 2000. And again, there's been some great stuff. Lots of national writers, national podcasts have written great things about Bobby Bowden, people who did have a relationship with him. And I know he was one of those guys that he was 91, I believe, when he passed. College writers for the last 10 years are calling Bobby Bowden on the phone to ask him about anything and everything, and he's picking up the phone.
Right.
So what a great resource, what a great ambassador for college football. 152 and 19
yeah.
in that 14-year period.
Yeah. And
he's doing it, at least the early part of it, simultaneously with the Miami dynasty. In that period, he went 7-7 against Miami in that 14-year period. He went 145-12 against everybody else. So this is a time when Florida football is dominant. And Bobby Bowden there's a team right down the road in the state that he has to deal with on the recruiting trail constantly every day. And he still is able to do what he did. 2 national titles, played for 3 more that they lost, had a year where they beat Florida in a rivalry game in the last game of the regular season, had to rematch for the national title and lost it, but just was always there. It is such an amazing, I guess Saban's getting ready. Saban's 14 years in at Bama. I mean, it's Saban-esque. Saban has more titles, but the consistency of that period of time is the thing that he was just always there. As somebody who was from afar, you knew Florida State was good every year because of that guy.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I'll spoil some of the surprise. Hey, guess what? Nick Saban is number 1 on my list on the best active coaches right now in our playoff discussion. But you want to look for the last time that Nick Saban finished outside of the AP top 5? You have to go back 1 year, right? They finished number 8 in 2019. They have 4 years since Saban took over that they've been outside of the top 5. Now, they've been top 10 all of those years. That's perfect, outside of 2007, of course. That's perfectly respectable. But year over year over year in the same state, like you mentioned with that Miami dynasty, to be in the conversation, we may never see that again.
No, I think that's very fair to say. Shehan, I was an AP voter once upon a time. I was an AP voter, in fact, that people hated. I had some slight notoriety because people hated how I voted. I didn't do it for the hate. People are always like, Doug, you're just doing it for attention. It's like, am I just doing it so that strangers can email me terrible things about my vote and make fun of me? No, I'm not doing it for that. It's just how I voted. You're not, I'm not good at, are you currently an AP voter? You should be an AP voter. Are you?
I'm not.
We'll get you.
I'm not.
Let me talk to Ralph.
Yeah, call me AP.
If you had an AP vote, who would be your preseason number 1? I know that they are tabulating and calculating and getting those votes in right now. I think the poll comes out next week. Who would you vote number 1?
This is a very difficult question. I think that this is one of the tougher years to do this that there's been in a while. Obviously, you have to consider all the teams that are kind of always in that top 4 mix. Obviously, you have to consider Georgia, who I think we talked about last week, is right there in that conversation. A lot of the time, if it makes sense, I feel like I want to default to the defending national champion if they bring enough back. I'm worried about that. I don't feel like they bring enough back to be number 1 in the country. Same with Clemson, same with Ohio State. You're dealing with some really key losses on both those teams. So I'm going to go a little off the wall here, and I'm going to go Oklahoma number 1. And the reason that I say that, you have, in a year where everybody else is replacing key pieces, Oklahoma brings back almost everybody. I think that they're going to be as ready when the season opens as anybody else, which is, I think, a big part of my calculus as well. I certainly think that if Oklahoma is going to win a national championship, this is probably going to be the year that they do it, while you do have a transitional year at Alabama, at Clemson, to a lesser extent at Ohio State. The path is very manageable, certainly. You play Nebraska in the non-conference, and you should. Iowa State's going to be a really tough game, but you should be able to beat everybody on your schedule. I think that they are, along with maybe Ohio State, the most likely, and Clemson, of course, but the most likely to win their conference for a trip to the playoff. So, to me, Oklahoma has all those pieces together. They're going to need to elevate themselves to a place where they win a playoff game, which they have not done as yet. That's the key part. But when you look at what they bring back on both sides of the ball, when you look at how much their defense has improved, and when you look at how good Spencer Rattler was in the last half of last year, I think that Oklahoma's a very fair number 1 overall pick.
When I voted, I always looked for shorthand: offensive line, defensive line, quarterback. Mm-hmm. Those were the 3 areas that I looked at. And so if you look at that with Oklahoma, they have the best quarterback. They have probably the best offensive line, one of the best 2 or 3 offensive lines at the very least. And they probably have a top 5 defensive line. So like if I was sticking to that, like that's hard to get away from. I maybe would go Georgia.
Okay.
Because in talking quarterback, it's like, well, who are the teams where you have a little certainty at quarterback, right? Well, Oklahoma's one. I think next among the contenders is Georgia. And you know Georgia's always good on defense. They have a lot of guys to replace, as we covered last week on the main pod. But I think you can believe in what they do defensively. And then they have interesting skill position guys. And so if you believe in JT Daniels and what he showed last year, I think you should. I could very much imagine myself going Georgia, but I think those would be my top 2 teams.
Yeah.
And I would not fall into the, it's always Bama, it's always Clemson. Not that it's a trap. My guess will be that Alabama will be the preseason number 1.
And I can't argue.
Kind of for what you said. I mean, and what do you get? I mean, you bet against Saban?
How dare you? You boost up Alabama. Oh my gosh.
Maybe let's put that headline on this podcast. Is Alabama a fraud as a preseason number 1? See if that gets a little hate listen.
And the thing that I'll say too is that once you make the decision that you're not going to go with Bama or Clemson, I think it opens up the board in a big way, right? Because I think you can consider Ohio State. I think you can consider Georgia. I think you can consider Oklahoma. If you really want to go crazy with it, you could consider a Texas A&M or a Cincinnati, right? I mean, not that I don't think anybody would consider them, but it opens the door in a way when you don't have Alabama or Clemson as a clear number 1. And actually, I mean, I can tell you, we put together a big magazine over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, and we asked people, who do you pick to win the title? A lot of people, just because they know it's a down Alabama year potentially, they just default to Clemson, right? Well,
right.
I don't think that that's necessarily how it's going to go, right? And in that first game of the season, Georgia-Clemson, I mean, they could be in a position where they lose their spot in the college football playoff in week 1, right? And so when you take out Alabama, when you take out Clemson, I think it really opens the door. And so I think Oklahoma and Georgia would probably be those first 2 teams up.
I do think if you're okay with quarterback uncertainty, and I think in this era where people are starting new 5-star quarterbacks all the time, if you're okay with quarterback uncertainty, I think you probably have to go with Bama. So that's why I wouldn't go from Bama to Clemson, because it's like, well, how much more certainty do you have with DJ than you do with Bryce? But if you're looking for a little bit of a more of a sure thing at quarterback, then I think you're looking at Oklahoma and Georgia, and then you're trying to decide who has the most complete team of those 2 teams.
If you're going to give me quarterback uncertainty, I'd rather take a team with quarterback uncertainty that has Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson than one who has John Mechie and some dudes.
Not a bad idea. That's a good argument too. Ohio State has 10 dudes on offense, and they're just not sure who the quarterback's going to be. That offense is loaded, but a lot of questions on defense. You guys really should listen to a national college show that really outlines all the contenders and ranks them in various ways. I wish one of the, it does. The Big Pod. Make sure you listen to the big one every Wednesday. This is the press conference show. We'll be back with more questions with Shehan and Doug right after this. Doug and Shehan back on the College Football Playoff Show press conference. If you want to be one of our tech subscribers, We send out surveys to tech subscribers. We send out little tidbits. That's only going to start rolling more as we get into the season, as we get into actually more like football stuff happening. It's free to try, and it's $1 a month. It's the cheapest thing that you can find. You lose $1. You lose $1 every month, I bet. You drop change out of your pocket, right? Your kid steals money out of your wallet. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm giving you a peek into my house. My kids don't steal my money, but as far as I know, like you do silly things. I call it, like, people talk about cost of living, right? Like, oh, the cost of living increased. The cost of living to me is like all the dumb things I do with my money that I just say it's the cost of being alive. I'm not going to, I mean, I should be smarter and more responsible, but it's just how it works. So you blow $1. You set $1 on fire every month. Give it to us instead and get texts about college football. 817-442-6789. You send a text there. You get to sign up. And we're literally giving it to you free at the start. Because we're like, I don't know if you want to pay the whole $1, Shehan. We're asking a lot. So try it free. 817-442-6789. You set money on fire, right? You're young. You're dumb.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm the perfect example of this, okay? So we moved into a new house in April, and it happens to be right by a tollway. Now, we don't have to take the tollway places. We can easily get around a tollway, right? But there is a Target that is like, probably, it cuts the drive from like 11 minutes to like 7 minutes, and it's basically round trip $1. So like, I have gotten to the point where I'm so lazy that I will save 4 minutes on a trip to spend $1, right? And so if I can do that for that, I think you can do that for 2 podcasts a week.
A 4-minute savings on a Target run. You get college football information. You love college football, which is why you even tried this podcast. All right, enough begging. Shehan, you got a question for me?
Yes, I do. So last week we ranked the best defenses of the college football playoff contenders and also the worst defenses of the college football playoff contenders. So my question is, how do you, as an individual, when you're looking at a team, when you're ranking a team, when you're trying to figure out if they're a title contender, how do you determine whether a team has a championship level defense to the point that you need to, I guess, win a championship, right? Is it a metric? Is it a ceiling that you have to hit? Is it very dependent? Is it just a gut feeling? How do you kind of decide that?
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I think there's some basic metrics, right? DVOA, defensive efficiency kind of stuff rate. There's a lot of good sort of analytical measurements of defense that I think that everybody looks at nowadays. Everybody looks at those. You're not going to get an edge by looking at those. It's just, you sort of set a baseline. And then I do fall on stars. And I'm okay with that, because I do think if I don't see a pass rusher that can make a difference, if I don't see a corner that can make a difference, if I don't see a playmaking safety that can make a difference, or a linebacker who's going to blow up your run game or cause a lot of trouble in coverage, if I don't see at least maybe 2 of those guys, maybe 3, maybe 1 at each level, I'm going to wonder if when push comes to shove, because we're not talking about like be the best defense in your conference. We're talking about beat Bama, beat Clemson, stop Heisman level quarterback defenses, right? And so I lean on that. Maybe it's laziness, but I also believe it, right? That like when Ohio State had Chase Young a couple years ago, it's like that. Like if you're like, we're going to talk about even next week, I think, on the main pod, who has the best individual defensive players, right? It's like Kayvon Thibodeau is going to get my attention about Oregon. Patrick Surtain got my attention last year for Alabama. If you believe in LSU at all, it's about Derek Stingley Jr., right? I mean, it's like guys like that I think you have to have, because somebody needs to make a play on 3rd down in a playoff semifinal to get you over the top. Because these teams all have good stuff to get there. But I need at least, I think, 2 get you over the top defensive players. Otherwise, I think you're like a try-hard defense that has a good scheme or whatever, but like you're going to get burned on 3rd and 11 because you can't get to the quarterback, or you don't have a guy who can cover a number 1 receiver in the moment. So I think it's a reasonable way to do it, even though it's a little bit of a stars matter kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that there's validity to that. I think that for me, it's a sliding scale for sure, right? Because what Oklahoma needs versus what Georgia needs historically with how they've played, right? Like, it's different things to reach kind of that title level. But I think for me, in addition to the normal stuff, like you said, the defensive efficiency stuff, I look probably more than most at yards per play. I look probably more than most at sort of points per possession, points per drive allowed, that kind of thing. But I think the other thing for me is just third down defense. I think the ability to get off the field, whether it's in short yardage, whether it's in long yardage, I think that's critical, right? Because, at one point we really talked a lot about time of possession and things like that. That's, to me, this is the more accurate read on that. Can your defense get you off the field in key spots? Whether it is through a pass rush, whether it is through having a Derek Stingley, whether it is through just being, like Iowa State, consistently solid 1 through 11. That is probably how I would define it. Just in key moments, can your defense step up and make a play? Can they make a stop? Can they turn the ball over? I think that, and so it is kind of a little bit of a gut feeling for me. There were Oklahoma defenses way back when that obviously were statistically bad, but it was more that in the big moments, I did not feel like I could trust them to make the play that they needed to make. And, so I'm curious to see now, as Ohio State gets older, as Oklahoma gets older, as, some of these other defenses come together, I'm curious to see whether they reach that sort of critical mass for me.
Because nobody stops anybody anymore.
Right.
It's about stopping them when it matters now and then, right? And not just letting, and you're going to give up big plays and that kind of thing. But I think being able to limit sustained drives, someone's going to hit you for an 80-yarder. You're going to get a great pass rush, and the quarterback, these great players at quarterback, they're going to escape a sack and run 50 yards when you didn't expect it. But you can't just let people march down your throat on 5 80-yard drives in a game. You've got to get, I think that's a very reasonable way to do it in the modern age. Let's do, looking at week 1. We're going to jump a little bit because we are excited for the football. We know Clemson, Georgia is the best week 1 game, Shehan. Which game other than that are you most interested week 1? And I decided to give you 4 options. We have North Carolina at Virginia Tech on Friday. We have Alabama versus Miami in Atlanta, that neutral site game on Saturday. We have Penn State at Wisconsin on Saturday. And we have Notre Dame at Florida State on Sunday night that week. So there are those games are interesting maybe for different reasons, but I wanted to put some games in there that I think are potential tests for some maybe contenders. So that's where a lot of my interest is, of like, okay, well, how legit might this team be? Where's your interest there?
This is tough. There isn't an obvious good on good matchup necessarily in this. There are some potential good versus good matchups. So the way that I start this off, I'm just taking off UNC Virginia Tech and Florida State Notre Dame, because I feel like if those are games, that just means that a team is much worse than we thought that they were. I don't think that Florida State has a ceiling of being actually good. I don't think that I don't think that Virginia Tech necessarily has a ceiling of being actually good.
So you don't think so? Neither Notre Dame nor North Carolina can prove much to you, because again, that's what those games would be. Are they prove it games a little bit for Notre Dame and North Carolina? You don't think they really can prove much in week 1?
No, I mean, if you go out and if you beat them 50-0, sure, then that's a conversation, right? But it would have to be that kind of statement. Going out and winning a nice game by 2 scores, I mean, that's what I feel like you're supposed to do if you're one of these teams. Okay. I don't think that has a whole lot of intrigue for me. And then you get to the other group. So with Alabama, Miami, the big thing that I like about that, and the reason I'm probably going to pick that game, is because I do think, one, you have a guaranteed, if it pans out, you have a guaranteed playoff level team in that game. Whether it is Alabama obviously doing what we expect them to do, and it could be a bad game. That's probably the argument against that game, right? Is that Alabama might just be a lot better than Miami. But I do think that they can at least prove that this is the Alabama train rolling on to some extent. So I do think we can learn something from that game. And if Miami comes out and plays really well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a top 4 team. But I think that does say, oh, this is like a real contender in the ACC Coastal. This is a team that is going to be able to go and compete with North Carolina for that division. It's a team that maybe could give Clemson a little bit of trouble. Not necessarily saying that they could beat them, but the floor of Alabama in a rebuilding year is still borderline playoff level. So if Miami does come out, that doesn't mean that like Alabama's not going to go 6-6 next year, right? It does mean something. It's like physically impossible, right? It's not going to happen.
Right.
And so that's probably what I give the advantage to. I mean, Penn State, Wisconsin, I think it's probably going to be the most fun game of the group. I just don't know if I'm confident that it matters or means anything.
It's hard. I think, depending what you think of Indiana, I think it's very possible that Penn State and Wisconsin are the second, third best teams in the Big Ten this year. Sure. And so you're trying to figure out, like, well, who's going to give Ohio State the best game? Whether it's Penn State in the regular season or whether it's Wisconsin as a West champ against Ohio State in a Big Ten championship game. And you're going to find that out right away. And by the way, probably the fourth and fifth best teams in the Big Ten are also playing in week one because Indiana's playing Iowa. So I wish like the second best teams in these conferences were better, right? That like Iowa State kind of is this year to Oklahoma. I don't know if there's a Big Ten team like that to Ohio State. I like, will North Carolina be that to Clemson? Maybe. We think maybe, but we're not sure. Like, who's the second best team in the ACC for sure, and how much of a rival are they really to that number one team? So I do think we will get a read on, can the winner of that Penn State Wisconsin team, or even if it's not the winner, but the team that looks like it has the best players who have a chance to hang with Ohio State. I think that does matter. I am kind of out on the Alabama non-conference early season neutral site games because I think it's all a bait and switch. Sure. And like De'Aaron King's a good player, and like Bama's going to beat him and get credit for it. And then it turns out, how good is Miami? This is the end of that, though. My Alabama has lived on these neutral site games, and they're done with them. They're starting to get back to the home and homes, and credit to them, they now have home and homes for the next decade scheduled with basically every major power in the country. So I'm glad. And I was going to ask you that question, but that's another thing we can get into on another day about what's the ideal sort of non-conference setup, especially as we're trying to figure out playoff teams and that kind of thing. So I'm not buying the non-conference thing for Bama, and I'll be glad when we see them every other year tested on the road in games like this.
All right, let's close out with this. It'll be very quick. Nick Saban just signed a contract through 2028 to stay in Tuscaloosa. For reference, Nick Saban is 69 years old, will turn 70. So that means that he is signed through being 77 years old. That said, who lasts longer? Because one name that I have heard talked about as a potential successor for Nick Saban is Steve Sarkisian. Who lasts longer at their current job? Nick Saban or Steve Sarkisian?
I mean, would you bet on any coach who just got hired lasting 8 years in his job?
No.
So it has to be Saban. Like Saban's there as long as he wants to be. That's not the case for Sark. So, because it's one of those things again, and you get into things. Sark at Texas, he could do poorly and be out in 4 years, or he could do great and be out in 4 years right. and be coaching the Minnesota Vikings or whatever, right? That like all these guys that, you know, if they're offensive geniuses and you don't know what kind of eyes they have for the NFL. So I think when you have a double move like that, I mean, there's no way, but I just think almost in general, 8 years is a long time for anybody who's not the greatest coach of all time. So I will take Saban, and you are the Texas expert. I would imagine you're taking Saban too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, I think that Steve Sarkisian is a great hire. I think he's going to do very well there. I think he's hired a tremendous staff and recruited very well, but also I just saw the movie where the former national championship winning offensive coordinator with all the hype in the world came to Austin, Texas, and didn't love the ending. So we'll see if the sequel's any better.
That's not a great movie. That's like direct. That's like on Peacock. The Tom Herman story, now on Peacock. Like they get the Olympics done and they're like, he's in Mensa. He won a national championship as an offensive coordinator. He won at Houston, and now he's here to save the Longhorns. Or is he? Next on Peacock, the 8-part miniseries, The Tom Herman Story. When Tom Herman was at Ohio State, he and I, at one point, did attend the same One Direction concert. And I thought, that's it. We're going to be best friends. And I am going to ride this guy to the top of the mountain. Just talking about who do you like better, Louis or Liam? And it didn't work out for either of us.
I mean, come on. Obviously, for me, it's Zayn. What am I supposed to do with that?
No, don't even start on Zayn. Don't even start on Zayn. I saw One Direction 3 times in concert, and I saw how disinterested Zayn was. He did not want to be there. I knew a year before he left the band that he was out. He tried to tear that group apart, and I will never forgive him. Okay, sorry. You didn't know you were pressing my One Direction button, did you? That's my One Direction
I clearly
button.
do not know the podcast I signed up for.
I love boy bands. They're so, I mean, I wish I could be in one. There's no 47-year-old boy bands. If you're starting a boy band for 47-year-olds, please, I will give you a free $1 a month tech subscription if you let me in your 47-year-old man boy band. Oh, it's such good music. It's so snappy. I like to run to it. I mean, can't get enough of it. Anyway, the movie was good. The One Direction movie was good. I went to Toronto. I drove to another country to see One Direction. Now, to be clear, I do have children. They liked One Direction also. I wasn't there by myself, but I wasn't complaining.
I don't know. I just heard the last 3 minutes of this show. Are you sure you have kids?
Yeah, I know. It's like they did a sketch on Saturday Night Live about One Direction dads, and Paul Rudd was the One Direction dad, and I was like, this is too real. I'm not laughing. Like, this is not funny to me. This is real life. All right, so next week, we'll be talking about top 10 One Direction songs. We'll be doing an in-depth comparison between NSYNC and One Direction, different generations, but who is the better band? I mean, I go back to New Kids on the Block. I mean, I'll rock NKOTB all night. So anyway, I can't imagine what the audience crossover is for, like, oh my God, this college football podcast I listened to, I also love boy bands. And they talked about boy bands at the end for 5 minutes. The audience is cut in half right now. I am murdering our audience for like the 2 people who are like great boy band discussion, Doug.
I will say I didn't think jumping into this because I mean I like One Direction just fine, you know. I don't mind pop music all that much, so like, you know, I thought that maybe I'd have like some takes on One Direction that would carry this, but I did not expect whatever just happened here.
No, I pitched it originally as a college football / boy band podcast, and they didn't go for the / so it's just college football. Someday we'll see how this podcast goes. Thanks to you guys for listening to it. That's the College Football Playoff Show press conference where we answer questions every week. And then, of course, the main pod. Again, make sure that's coming later in the week. Make sure you catch that. Notre Dame and ranking the playoff contenders by how good their head coaches are. If you want to text me about One Direction, I will answer in 5 seconds, and we can go all in on that. 817-442-6789. For Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Playoff Show.